What's up, everybody? I was working on another video. I had to stop. I want to put this up standalone because it's a topic I really haven't talked about much. But this idea does play a role in my bigger picture of things. Now, I don't know why you get a wiki sticky when you talk about these beans, so I'm just going to refer to them as the Naki. I'm trying to skate out to thicker ice after the last couple videos. But I'm going to read some of the story about the Naki, and it's not so much the actual story and the details in and of themselves. It's the overall idea and theme of this. Every culture has stories of the old gods. Now, sometimes the gods mean the stars and the planets. But with stories like the Naki and you having Enki as a teacher of mankind, it matches up with Quetzalcoatl, Prometheus. There's a lot of these mythologies that sound like we are talking about actual physical beings. And I think that's what we have in our past. Now, I know Ancient Aliens has taken this and ran with it, and I really haven't dug in to check the validity of an extraterrestrial claim here. I think that there are numerous scholars that have learned the cuneiform language, so I don't know if all of them agree with that claim or if it's just something that like Zachariah Sitchin came up with. Sitchin. I've heard that he had some ties and run-ins with Central Intelligence, but if you really think about it, due to the subject nature here, that would almost be expected. If I came out and told everybody that there were beings far in advance of anything that we could come up with, that if they wanted to, they could squash us like a bug, like in the deluge that they take credit for, well then, of course, the people who are only concerned with the continuity of government are going to take notice. But the whole space aliens idea isn't the only way to look at this, and it's not the way I look at it. The Muslims say that there was an entire race of jinn that populated the earth before humans. They built cities, they ate food, they married one another, they had wars against one another. It was an entire race of beings. They even had religions. But they are described as being made of a smokeless fire, where we were made of clay. And I think that's an interesting point whenever you think about the old burnt offerings to the gods. Yahweh, the one true God who wanted burnt animals just like every other false god, said the smell of burning animals pleased him. Now, I think Yahweh is just one of this entire race of gods that we had here. And they got their nutrition through the actual smoke of people burning an offering to them. There's the story of Moses wanting to see God, and he said, okay, you have to hide in a crack in the wall here, and I'm going to put my hand over you so that I don't fry you as I'm walking by. His glory, the energy emanating off of him and the light, is too much for a human to handle. Enlil, the king of the gods, is so bright and mighty that not even another god can look upon him. So I don't think that these gods, at least the powerful ones, are of the same substance as us. And well, a smokeless fire is a good enough description for me for now. So instead of these being space aliens, I think it just as likely that they were beings from earlier in creation, and the earlier in creation you are, the more powerful the being was. And this is kind of described by different mythologies. We'll go with the Gnostic version here. So you have the monad, the true God, the source of everything. Everything emanates from him. Or well, in this case, a him, her is actually fitting. And then from the monad came about the primeval forces, personified emanations of the Godhead. The Greek were pretty straightforward about this, and this isn't the way it went, but just as an example, you have the goddess of love and the god of anger. And then they had a child, and that child was jealousy, because if you mix love with anger, that's pretty much what you get. And these are kind of behind the scenes forces that we really can't comprehend in this realm. And then a few levels down from that, you have the demiurge, which means the builder, creator. But this is where my understanding diverges from the Gnostics' point of view. What if instead of a creator, it was creators? Even in Genesis, it says, let's make man in our image. So I'm not 100% either way on that. It could be a creator God at the top of the hierarchy, and then the other gods are subservient to it. Or it could have been a collaboration between quite a few gods, which is not so much, but kind of what you get with the Naki story. But I think that the original incarnate beings had more of the divine spark in them, and they had more power than us little puny humans. You look at old Hinduism, and there was a demon that was capable of destroying the whole world. And if this is all emanations from a conscious mind, then you might decide to tone it down a little bit. Maybe a neutron bomb isn't the best present for a 5-year-old to play with. Because even if a being is imbued with awesome powers, they got to start from somewhere if they're not the original source. And therefore, they have to learn how everything operates in this realm just like we do from birth. And I actually view a demon as an inadvertent manifestation. The monad may have just got angry and all of a sudden a demon pops out. Or it started out as a good being and then got corrupted. And actually, this line of thinking for me answers an ages-old question. How could evil come from a loving God? Well, I look at it like this. When you have a child, you're passing on all your genetic information to another person and basically giving it all the same abilities that you have. But then you don't have any control over what they end up doing. Of course, you're going to try to raise them right and to be good people, but ultimately, you don't have any control over that. Well, I see the same thing with a God that is pretty much all love. They could hand off all of their abilities to a lesser being that's still way more powerful than us, and then give that being free will, and they could wreak havoc and cause chaos in the world with those godly abilities imbued in them. Under those circumstances, the original creator God could be all loving, but if you give another being free will, then it's up to them what they do with those abilities that you gave them. So if you kind of just throw all that in a blender, then you're getting somewhere close to the way I think. And in this realm of thinking, I don't hold anything as absolute fact. There is a probability scale that is constantly rebalancing with every little nugget of information I put on there. So with all of that as a baseline starting point, let's read a little bit about the Naki and just use that as a generalization of the old gods. These actual physical beings that at one time interacted with human beings, and it sounds like they created human beings. Every time it says Naki here, you can hold that as Naki / old world gods / jinn / angels, just to leave it loosely defined since we don't really know exactly what we're talking about here. All I know is that they were beings that interacted with mankind. Mainstream historians and archaeologists regard the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq as the cradle of civilization. Between 4000 and 1900 BC, this area was home of the Sumerian people of Mesopotamia. Virtually nothing was known about Sumer until its archaeological discovery 180 years ago. So in the West, we've been living in this biblical paradigm for the last at least 1,000 years. And we just learned about the Sumerians about 180 years ago. And just so you know, the French somehow managed to take control of all archaeological sites in the East there after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And there have been 500,000 clay tablets found. It wasn't until 1976 that Zecharia Sitchin published his translations of these texts in a book called The Earth Chronicles. And it says here that his translations have been confirmed by many other credible researchers. So make what you will of that, but I take it as other scholars have sat down and learned the language and verified that this is what it actually says. And it's not just one guy saying that, oh, they said this. The story goes like this. About 450,000 years ago, before the Great Flood and during Earth's Pleistocene Ice Age, the Naki arrived on Earth. They established their initial base camp in Mesopotamia in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates. And I'm just reading what's written here so you can throw your Rotten Tomatoes elsewhere. Here they set up a mission control center, a spaceport, and mining operations. The supreme ruler, Anu, supervised the effort from the home planet of Nibiru, as the Naki began a systematic colonization of Earth under the leadership of Anu's two sons, Enlil and Enki. Over thousands of years, the Naki established a thriving colony. During this time, their focus was on their primary objective, gold. The Naki sought gold for highly technological procedures to repair the degraded condition of the atmosphere on their home planet. And it is a strange question of why gold has always been so sought after by mankind. The extraction process proved inefficient and time-consuming when the Naki attempted to retrieve gold only from the Persian Gulf. So to ease the increasing rivalry between the half-brothers Enlil and Enki, their father, Anu, placed Enlil in charge of the Mesopotamian colony, Eden. Meanwhile, Enki led a foray into Africa, the, quote, land of the mines, and eventually to South America, where he set up gold mining operations. The mined ore was then transported from the far-flung mines by cargo craft back to Mesopotamia for smelting and processing into hourglass-shaped ingots called zag, or purified precious. Some of these actual ingots have been found in archaeological excavations. The Naki mined gold on Earth for more than 100,000 years until the rank and file who were doing the back-breaking work in the mines mutinied about 300,000 years ago. Now, I've also heard that all of the physical work was being done by the Ajiji, kind of an intermediary being, but they don't seem to be mentioned here. I'm just going to read it as is. And also, like I said, I'm not going for the specific details here. It's kind of the overview of what these ancient gods were. And I may be mixing together two different stories here, but Enlil wondered aloud if there was not another way to mine for gold. At this point, Enki suggested that a primitive worker called an Adamu could be created to take over the difficult mining work. Enki pointed out that there was a primitive humanoid prevalent in Africa where he maintained a laboratory. This might help you guys remember who's who. I always get Enlil and Enki mixed up. Enki, in kind. So Enki was the one that helped humans. To the Greeks, this would have been Prometheus. To the Mayans, Quetzalcoatl. A lot of cultures say that everything we know was taught to us by this being. Realizing the toll on the Naki to mine the gold, King Anu and his council on Nibiru was desperate for a different solution. They debated the morality of tinkering with a species. Enki argued that producing a hybrid, half Naki, half primitive humanoid, would not be an act of creation, but merely improving the existing species. Wow, there's the root of our modern politicians right there. And so Anu decreed that Enki would employ advanced genetic engineering to fashion an upgraded version of the primitive humanoid by manipulating its DNA to become the new worker slave, the Adamu. The medical officer on Earth was a female named Ninhursag. The Sumerian tablets describe how Enki and Ninhursag produced the first so-called test tube infant by combining DNA and creating a hybrid humanoid in the lab. The first hybrid human could not procreate. The Naki had to constantly create new batches of human workers. So Enki and Ninhursag set about to create an Adamu that could reproduce itself. The result of their efforts was finally a male Adama with the ability to reproduce through sex with a female Adamu. These were the first modern human beings. The early Adamu that bred among themselves lived for hundreds of Earth years. The Nephilim, half human, half Naki, lived for thousands of years. All this longevity was thanks to Naki genes, and in the opinion of ancient humans, the extreme lifespans of pure-blooded Naki made them appear immortal. One of the concerns of the Naki, including Enlil, was that the new humans would want to live for as long as their pure-blooded Naki overlords. As a result of this concern, the Naki set about manipulating the DNA to reduce their lifespan drastically and limit the total capacity of their brains. Is that why our DNA is just cut at a certain point? They say that 98% of our DNA is junk DNA, and nature doesn't produce excess. 2 eyes will give you stereoscopic vision, so you don't need a third one. Anyway, the Naki denied Homo sapiens the intelligence and extreme longevity that the Naki possessed because it did not suit their purposes. Homo sapiens were invented to be a slave worker race. Humanity multiplies, and their presence becomes a nuisance to Enlil. I've heard it's because they made too much noise. At first, Enlil tries to thin out the population using agricultural and medical means by sending droughts, which cause famine and pestilence. However, Enki intervenes each time and teaches humanity the proper ceremonies and rituals to appease the gods, causing the droughts, famines, and pestilence. Frustrated that his attempts to control the population of humanity have been thwarted, Enlil convenes a council of the gods and decrees that no god may interfere with his final plan to regulate the population of humanity. A deluge. And I want to draw attention to Enlil and the Hebrew name of El, which in the oldest parts of the Bible is the name of God. So Enlil, El, decided to send a deluge. Enki, being the cleverest of the gods, uses a loophole to subvert Enlil's plans once more. Instead of directly warning humanity about the coming catastrophe, he whispers news of it into a wall. Next to the wall, one of Enki's most loyal and devoted servants is standing. In this way, Enki follows the letter of Enlil's decree, but subverts its spirit. He doesn't directly interfere, but is also not responsible for a human overhearing his conversation. Enlil commands that various gods and goddesses who can utilize the deluge, both as an atmospheric phenomena, storms, or as a weapon of war, unleash their power. The deluge descends, wiping humanity from the face of the earth, save for the servant and his boat. In the wake of the deluge, the other gods and goddesses begin to regret their decision when it becomes clear that no one is left who can prepare and provide offerings and libations for them in their temples. This leads to the gods going hungry and risking starvation. The gods begin to mourn the loss of humanity, but are interrupted when Atrahasis, which is Noah or Utnapishtim, having docked his boat on solid land once more, prepares a burnt offering. The scent reaches up to heaven, and the gods draw near. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second because this brings us back to the point that I was making earlier. They received their nourishment through burnt offerings. Now, I'm going to point out an inconsistency here is if they were capable of mining gold out of the ground, it seems like they would be capable of making a bonfire and throwing a pig on there. However, here it seems like they rely on humans for their sustenance. What was it that Yahweh originally said to Moses? Well, he armed him with a few magic tricks. He said, go do these tricks in front of Pharaoh and then tell Pharaoh to let your people go, his people being a bunch of people that he'd never been around in his life because he was raised by the Egyptians. But anyway, let the Hebrews go so that they can go out into the desert and make sacrifices unto me. So my interpretation of things here isn't bulletproof, but I think it's a very strong argument that these were some type of maybe not physical quite like us, but some type of beings that require sustenance to live, and they need mankind to make offerings unto them. Enlil, however, is initially furious to see that humanity has once more survived his attempt to expunge them. He demands to know which of the gods defied his command, but Enki quickly chastises him for almost leading the entire pantheon to ruin. The great mother goddess Ninhursag sides with Enki and says that if Enlil is determined to do away with humanity, then he doesn't get to partake of their offerings anymore. The reality of starvation finally hits Enlil and is enough to temper his fury, and he acknowledges his error in trying to destroy humanity. Now, I believe that there's a story out there of Enki being punished for his actions here, which lines up with Prometheus being punished, because after he's caught helping the noisy little humans, then he is tied to a rock, and I believe an eagle eats his liver during the day, and then it regrows overnight and it starts all over the next day. So that's pretty bad. That's worse than the plight of Sisyphus for sure. Okay, so what is the takeaway here, and how does it fit into the bigger picture of things? Well, one thing I didn't cover in that version of the story is that every city had a patron god. And I kind of view this as like science officers on a colonialization mission. I mean, everybody's heard of, the storm god, especially if you see my video on Canaanites and this and that. They talk about the storm god being handed down to the next person in succession, or to the next god anyway. And modern historians just say, well, they just changed the name of the storm god because they assimilated with another culture. And no, the job passed on after 5,000-10,000 years. But you would also have the god of agriculture, the god of music, the god of health. That was each one of their individual specialties, just like we have doctors and scientists, but everybody still has a general education of how the world works, right? So all of these gods were much more knowledgeable than humans. And every time they would found a new city, one of the gods would be put in charge of that city. So this went on for possibly hundreds of thousands of years. What I can't find an answer for is, where did they all go? Because look, if we're talking about a being that has a 100,000-year lifespan, and the last ones were seen 3,000 years ago, odds are they're still alive. Just like I assume most of you guys are still alive that watched my last video. A few thousand years would be like a week to them. So I don't know, maybe they did return to a home planet like they're claiming here, or maybe that's what we've got going on with Agartha and what's going on in Tibet. And every culture around the world knows about the gods that are underground. So maybe they decided to give up the surface life and just go underground, literally. So let's presume that that is what happened. All the gods went underground, and then one god made an appearance after all the rest of them had left. That god is Yahweh. The Bible even talks about the god that is in charge of a certain town, like the story of Elijah. To prove whose God is more powerful, they put 2 stacks of wood out there, and the other team goes crazy, and they're cutting themselves and doing all this weird stuff trying to get their god to light the pile of wood on fire. It never does happen. And then Elijah says, okay, now soak my wood pile with water. Now do it again. And then he prays to Yahweh, and Yahweh sends down fire from heaven, and it lights the pile. And there are a lot of other stories in there that are antagonistic to the other gods. In my mind, I think that's because Yahweh knew that the other gods were no longer around. He probably wasn't even supposed to be here, just like Enki wasn't supposed to interfere with things. And honestly, I think that, just from his actions, Yahweh sounds like some little spoiled brat god that never got any respect because he didn't deserve any, the kind of kid god that tortures cats. And then once all the big gods are gone, then he decides to tell the humans, well, I am the only almighty God. But I still need you to burn those animals to me just like you did for the other gods. So that is kind of how I view the bigger picture of things. Of course, I'm always learning new info and nothing is set in stone for me, but I've spent a lot of time researching a lot of things, and this is just what makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys got something out of it, and I will catch you on the next one. Static out.